Most athletes chase the number and miss the fine print.
Even if the contract was to end, that specific agency had exclusive rights to that athlete's name, image, and likeness.
The thing that they need to realize is that the money shows up only once, but the contract lives forever.
These athletes will transfer, but they still owe the school.
Once NIL came on the scene, it doesn't require any sort of certification the way that it does at the professional level.
What is one clause or term athletes should never ignore? All right, so today for Beyond the Game series that we have Chris here. Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes, anytime. So before we get started, I know you very well. We've done work together, and so that's been awesome having you a part of FieldHouse Co. as someone we can rely on. Can you tell the folks a little bit about who you are, some of your accolades, and things of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so. So my name is Chris Pham, and I am a sports and entertainment attorney in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been practicing law for about 16 years now. More recently, I've really focused my practice on name, image, and likeness, which is NIL for short. And that's kind of been a blossoming area since 2021 when it came on the scene with the NCAA. In addition to practicing law, I am an entrepreneur. I co-owned a nightclub in Minneapolis for 9 years. I'm also an adjunct professor. So I'm teaching at the University of Minnesota Law School. I teach a sports and NIL clinic as well as a sports law moot court competition team. And I've been doing that for about 3 to 4 years now. With each of those courses. And so in addition to my professional life, obviously, personally, I have 4 kids, ages ranging 6 months all the way up to 18. Have a fiance that's holding down the fort with everything at home so that I can engage in all of these business and professional endeavors. And I think the only other thing you mentioned are, accolades. I've been humbled to receive various accolades over the years as an attorney and from the community. I was recognized as top 40 under 40 by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal. Just last month, I was acknowledged as Twin Cities Business Magazine's top 100 people you should know in the Twin Cities, along with various other accolades, Minnesota Attorney of the Year, Rising Star, Super Lawyer, all those fun things that come with doing work that you're passionate about.
So we're in front of a legend.
That is too kind. I don't know if I would say that, but I appreciate it.
You saved us a lot, so I'd say we're in front of a legend. So we'll just go ahead and get started into it. I know you mentioned NIL, and so that's really like the main focus of what we're talking about today specifically. First question is, what do athletes misunderstand most about contracts and NIL agreements?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, and not surprisingly so, most athletes chase the number and miss the fine print, right? So I think it's easy to look at that specific business term. How much am I going to make? How much am I going to get paid? And that's fine. Certainly that is important. But, the thing that they need to realize is that the money shows up only once, but the contract lives forever, right? And so a deal isn't just about what you're being paid today.
Yeah.
But it's also about what rights you're giving up tomorrow. And that includes exclusivity, the duration, the termination, and control over your name, image, and likeness, just as much as the check you're receiving. And so, I think that's important to know that, NIL deals go beyond just the dollar figure.
Yeah, that's really good that you mentioned that, because just to touch on your response to that, we do have athletes that kind of miss the fine print, which rightfully so, right? I'm just looking at how much I am getting paid. But recently, I have seen contracts even come across my desk where there's fine prints, from said agency or whomever stating that even if the contract was to end, that specific agency had exclusive rights to that athlete's name, image, and likeness. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is commonplace in some of these agency agreements is if an agent secures a deal, an endorsement opportunity for an athlete, right? What that agency may slip in is that, hey, if we get you a deal, let's just, use a household name like Nike. If we get you a deal with Nike and the deal with Nike is for, let's say, 2 years, right? And at some point within those 2 years, you decide to terminate your relationship with the agency can slip in some language that says if Nike renews that deal with you, they're going to continue to receive their commissions or their fees in perpetuity off of those renewals,
Mm.
right? And so you have to be mindful of that, you know, because if you're having to pay that former agent, you know, 20% on the Nike deal forever, and let's say you have a new agent that's coming on, now you're paying two separate agents. You're paying one agent, you know, on this Nike deal because they slipped in the commissions on the renewals in
Yeah.
perpetuity, and then, you know, any other new deals that come about. And so it's good to be mindful of understanding how the functions of those agreements take shape. Because just because you terminate doesn't necessarily mean that everything is all said and done, particularly with that agency or whoever you're working with.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for that, because I think that there's a lot of ambiguity around that topic specifically. Now, on the topic of agents, right? We full support agents, but I think from a household coming into NIL and even just navigating it, would it be fair to say your first stop, would be to get a really good lawyer, say you or whomever that the family feels comfortable with, before diving into picking a specific agent in the collegiate space?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can use an example that I just went through this exercise just over a month ago in December, right before the transfer portal hit for football.
Yeah.
I was working with an athlete and his family, and you know, a few months ago, so even before I'm talking about like the beginning of the football season, this family approached me and said, "Hey, we have this agency that's looking, you know, to sign our son. Can you review this agency agreement with us and kind of help us navigate this? This is all brand new to us, of course."
Yeah.
And so I took a look at it. You know, one of the first things that I do is I'll go look at the agency,
Mhm.
right? Because one thing that we know is since 2021, once NIL came on the scene, it doesn't require any sort of certification the way that it does at the professional level, right?
Yes.
So to be an agent in the NBA, the NFL, et cetera, you have to be certified, you have to take an exam, right? But with NIL, you know, if Sid and I wanted to start a co-agency tomorrow together, we could, you know, hang up a shingle and start a new agency,
100%. We might
right?
do it. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
exactly. So, you know, what I learned, you know, when this family approached me, they said, "Hey, this is the agency agreement." And I looked at it, you know, with my lawyer lens, the first thing I thought is they either Google this, use AI, or this is LegalZoom. It's not
Yeah.
something I could tell a lawyer put together. And so, of course, I went through, I redlined, I added my comments, and I sent it back to the family, had the conversation. The family said, you know, why don't you reach out to you know, this prospective agent, share your red lines and correspond with him directly and just copy us on the correspondence. And I was happy to do that.
Yeah.
And the agent responded immediately and was like, "Why would you think that we would agree to these changes and these terms? I hope you know what you're doing. You know, it says that you're a lawyer, but, you know, I hope you know how to advise this kid. He's a good kid in his family." And so I was kind of taken aback,
Yeah.
just because, for one, the email address I sent it to was some contractor landscaping company. So they didn't even have an official website domain for their agency. They didn't have any kind of web presence. It was literally, they filed, you know, probably something with the Secretary of State to get, you know, an LLC name to be an agent. And that was all they did. And maybe they're just interested in the sports space. Who knows? But, you know, the father responded to me and said, "Hey, you know, I don't even need you to waste any more time. This is obviously a red flag. You know, you're very professional. Everything that you shared with us made sense. So, you know, we're just going to ignore them and we'll just move on."
Yeah.
Right. So that was a few months ago. Fast forward to December, the same athlete had, I think, 14 agencies knocking at his door, including locally as well as some of the top 10 agents in the country with a global presence, right? So this athlete is obviously doing well. And so there, the family was like, "How do we navigate all of these, you know, prospective agents? How do we know who we should be working with?" And so what I advised the family at that time is, you know, start by sending out essentially a questionnaire to
Yeah.
each one of these agents, right? And say, "Hey, we just have some questions." And the questions can be, "How long have you been an agency?
Yeah.
When did you start? Did you start yesterday? Have you been doing this for 20 years? Like, tell us a little bit more about your agency," and answer maybe 10 to 15 questions. Most of these agents, if they don't want to spend the time to do that, okay, then maybe they're not the right fit.
Right.
So very quickly, the family was able to whittle it down to about 4 agents, right? Two local ones and two national ones with a global presence. And so we started going through and comparing the terms and conditions for each of the four, put together a memo to help them understand in a very easily digestible fashion, what is included in these agreements.
Yeah.
Through that process, the family and the athlete were able to, break it down to two agencies that they were looking at very seriously. And they said, with the two remaining agencies, these are a couple of things that, are kind of keeping us awake at night. One had to do with termination and how they can terminate and other things. And so they said, do you think we can get either one of these agents to kind of like be willing to compromise on some of these remaining terms?
Yeah.
So I sent over, additional red lines and comments in addition to the ones I had already previously sent the first go round, and the agents were receptive. They're like, hey, you know what? We stand by our abilities. We know what we are doing, and particularly at this athlete position, the same position as your client. So yes, we are willing to make these edits and changes that you and your client is proposing, right?
Mm.
And that speaks volumes, and that's a drastic difference from that initial agent from a few months ago. And not to mention that agent circled the wagon again and was like, hey, we know we probably didn't get off on the right foot, but we're still interested in this athlete if you guys would be willing to give us another shot. Of course, the family decided not to even respond, which I don't necessarily disagree with. And so, yes, there's a lot that goes into these contracts, and it's not for everyday people, like you act like, a lot of people think, oh, well, it's just a contract. I know how to read, I know how to digest,
No.
but there's a lot of things that are becoming more sophisticated, more complicated. And so working with that family, that was a great, example of how, you can really distill down like, all right, this agency says this agency says this. Which one are we more comfortable with? Which one is more flexible? And that's who we want to work with. And so going through that process, which took about, 3-4 weeks to go through all of that, they were finally at a point where they were ready to make a decision. And I can tell that, the agents also appreciated going through that process as well.
100%. Thank you. What is one clause or term athletes should never ignore?
Yeah, I think I just alluded to this. I think, one of
Yeah.
the most important things is term and termination, and those are often in the same provision. From my perspective, if you don't know how long the deal lasts or you don't know how to get out of it, you don't really know what the deal is, right? And so there are agreements that come from various places. There are agency athlete agreements, there are institution athlete agreements, and there are direct brand company athlete agreements as well. And so some of these are longer term, some of them are shorter term. And so, you have to review them to make sure that, the agreements are not quietly locking athletes in for years and years with
Mm.
limited exit options, right?
Yeah.
When the money stops making sense, the contract may still control you. And that's what you don't want to have happen.
Right.
Right. And so I think being very aware and understanding the term and termination is very important.
Speaking on that, when it comes to transferring, so our transfer portal for football just closed. And one thing that has come up to me a lot that we've seen even in the news is these athletes will transfer, but they still owe the school, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking tens and thousands of dollars. And even just aside from that, I guess how does that all if I already spent the money, how are they going to get their money back? What does that process look like?
Yeah, what's interesting about that is in these contracts, and these are primarily rev share contracts, meaning the
Yeah.
institution is paying the athlete. From what I have seen, and I've looked at a couple different varieties of these rev share agreements, the buyout clause isn't based on money that the institutions have already paid the athlete.
Okay.
It's oftentimes based on money that the athlete would have been paid, right?
Mm.
So I'm going to use an example of a case that was actually filed in court, and that's the Georgia versus Williams case. I believe the last name is Williams. And so in that case, Georgia has filed a lawsuit against its former athlete because that athlete entered the transfer portal, enrolled in another institution, which triggers the buyout clause. And in that buyout clause, Georgia has the right to say, hey, if you would have stayed with us, we would have ended up paying you $390,000.
Got it.
But because you left, now we are able to pursue that $390,000 from you, which is money Georgia has not paid the athlete. It's money they would have paid, which is, one, crazy to me, right?
Yeah.
Because you're pursuing monies that you didn't even have to come out of pocket to pay the athlete. But that's the mechanism of the buyout, right? And so Georgia right now, they are, in court. This is an active public litigation in which they are pursuing that. That's the case. The first case that we have seen actually filed. I know there's a Duke one that has also popped up since then. But there, Duke is taking it a step further. So in Duke's case, they are trying to restrict or prohibit their quarterback from transferring,
Yes.
which is very, very different than just a breach of contract. Under the contract, you owe us $400,000 because that's what the buyout says. With Duke, they're actually saying, hold on, like, no, you can't transfer. We're going to try
Yeah.
to block the transfer, which is, I think, a completely different remedy and approach. And so, I say all this to say there's a lot that complicates matters in the NIL space now that rev share has come on the scene. And
Yeah.
rev share is pretty new, right? So
Yes.
July 2025 is when rev share, came onto the scene. And so this is our first wave in the football transfer portal, seeing in real time how the mechanisms in these rev share agreements are functioning. We have schools suing former athletes, which is crazy because I think, traditionally from a PR perspective, you don't want to be known as a school suing your former athletes. Like, how are you
No.
going to recruit? Right? You're going to recruit and they're going to be like, wait a minute, like, you had a kid left and you tried to block him one, or you tried to get hundreds of $1,000s from him too. Like,
Yeah.
why would I want to go to that school? But that's the day and age that we live in, right? Schools want to protect themselves, their investments, and there are these complicated contracts, and not everybody understands them, right? Even agents, right? There are so many agents who are excellent at their job, but they might not be lawyers. And so I've seen more agents have a willingness to want to work with lawyers, in this space because things are getting so convoluted and complicated. I just had breakfast with an agent a couple of weeks ago, and he said, hey, the basketball transfer portal is coming up this spring.
Yeah.
I know this is the first cycle for basketball with
Mhm.
transfers under the rev share regime. And you know what? I probably am going to need your help in understanding what some of these contracts look like because they are getting more complicated.
Oh my goodness. So, just so the audience understands, if the school is coming back and saying you owe us X amount of dollars, that does not actually mean that the school paid them X amount of dollars. It just means this is what we would have spent, but we already want our money back.
That is correct. Right. Yep. So if you think about it, let's say a kid signs a $200,000 deal, and let's say the school has paid him 100,000, and then he decided to enter the transfer portal and enroll in another institution, and the school would have had $100,000 that they still owed him. Right. So with that $100,000 that they did not pay him, that they would have had to pay him, that is what they are tying the buyout provision to. And they can say, if you transfer and enroll in another school, the buyout is you have to pay us either 100%, which is a full 100,000, or half, or some other mechanism, right? But yes, the buyouts are typically tied to monies the school did not even pay. So it's not like they're trying to claw back what they paid you. They are trying to go after what they didn't pay you.
So, in your line of work, do you ever see there being maybe a petitioning around this buyout process?
I think that as athletes hopefully
Yeah.
see, what is becoming public with Duke, Georgia, and I'm sure there's going to be other situations. Washington almost had a situation, but their quarterback decided to stay,
Mhm.
right? As athletes recognize that there's a lot of activity around the buyout, my hope is that, themselves or working with their agent or whoever, decide to loop in legal counsel to review these agreements so that you can negotiate them because a lot of these terms, might be negotiable,
Yeah.
right? To your point, you could absolutely counter and say, hey, we don't want the buyout tied to the amount that you didn't pay us. Let's tie it to what you have already paid and maybe a fraction or a percentage, right? If you've already paid me $200,000 at the time that I enrolled somewhere else and transferred, maybe, the buyout is a clawback of 100,000 of that or 50,000 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's not uncommon to make such a proposal or a counter offer. And some of these, obviously, I think a lot comes into play how bad the school wants the athlete, how bad the athlete wants to go to that particular school, right? There's a lot of, everything's a negotiation and trying to figure out what both sides can be willing to agree to.
Yeah. You mentioned what to look out for within a contract. Is there anything specifically that you would say should almost always be added as an athlete or a parent dealing with these contracts? A specific clause, maybe, that you think should be a part of that to protect the athlete best?
Yeah, there's definitely a variety of things that you want to protect the athlete with. One thing that comes to mind is, having some say or control on how your NIL is being utilized,
Mm,
right? There's a creative control mechanism where you can add something in a contract that says essentially, I want approval rights,
yeah,
right? If there's going to be a certain manner in which you guys are utilizing my name, image, and likeness. Now, oftentimes both sides are aligned, right? Because, both parties want to make sure they are showing the athlete in the most positive, wonderful, amazing light.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that may not always be the case because, people have creative differences,
right.
right? One person might be thinking, oh, like, I like how this looks, or this commercial, or this billboard, or this magazine spread looks. But the
Yeah,
athlete and parent might decide, you know what, I don't really like that, or, that's not something that I agree with. And so wanting to protect the athlete's brand and reputation, is by having some sort of creative control or some sort of approval rights in how their NIL is being used. I think that's one important thing. Something else that is important that has come up in a couple of different matters that I've worked on, relate to attorney's fees,
mm,
right? And so oftentimes attorney's fees they're not an uncommon provision in a commercial agreement, but knowing how they function,
mm,
right? There are some attorney's fees provisions that say, all right, if one of the parties breach and we have to bring a breach of contract action, the prevailing party is entitled to pursue attorney's fees. That means if you win, you
yeah,
can pursue attorney's fees. Other ones will just say, if we have to bring a suit no matter what, regardless if we win or lose, we're entitled to get our attorney's fees, which is a little bit more unfavorable, right? And so
right.
understanding how that attorney's fee shifting provision takes shape and how it plays out in the real world, I think is really important to understand. And that's one of those things where, an agent might see it, can read it, but might not understand how it functions, right?
Right.
And that's where having a consultation or looping in legal counsel to help understand that, I think is really important.
That's great. I love the fact that you gave the example about the approval part because I have seen instances where an athlete comes to me and they're like, well, yeah, the school just told me I had to sign X amount of footballs and that's just what I did. Well, they didn't know, that X amount of dollars were made off of that signature on those footballs. But it also, more than likely, was not a part of their contract to have that explicitity, for a lack of a better word, in regards to that.
Yeah, and that just reminded me to your prior question. Another thing that I think is super important to make sure that you're paying attention is exclusivity.
Yes.
Right? Exclusivity is another one of those provisions that I think are so important where, and this isn't as probably relevant anymore because collectives are not, playing as major of a role now.
Yeah.
But I remember, when NIL deals first started being signed and, there were exclusivity requirements. And
Mm,
then all of a sudden, let's say I'm an athlete, I sign an exclusive deal with an agency and they're going to get 20% of every deal they bring to me. And then my school's collective comes knocking. It's like, hey, we have this opportunity. We'd like you to work with this individual or this company. Can you do so?
yeah.
And this isn't coming from the agent. This is coming from the collective.
Right.
And if the collective is bringing this opportunity, but the athlete has already signed this deal that has agreed to give their agent their commission on all things, whether it comes from the agency or not, that can be problematic. So sometimes, at least when collectives were more prevalent, what I was doing with my athletes was I was carving out, exclusivity so that it would not apply to one things that were brought about that were unrelated to the agency, right? So if the
Yeah.
agent did not procure, negotiate, bring this opportunity, they're not getting their commission.
Yeah.
And if a collective does, then you have the right to figure out what that looks like with the collective. And so there's oftentimes a non-exclusivity arrangement of some sort. I think that's still important to look out because even now, a lot of folks are just jumping in DMs, right? Like I have athlete clients who are like, hey, this person reached out in my DMs, like, how does this work? Because I have an agent. And so, well, let me take a look at the agency agreement. If the agency agreement says that we're only getting our commissions on what we procure, negotiate, and bring to the table, and you do this over here, somebody reaches out to you proactively in your DMs or otherwise, then on those deals, you don't have to pay a commission. So
Right.
understanding again, how exclusivity or non-exclusivity works, I think is really important.
I love that you said that because I have seen that myself where it's like, no, this agent, whatever you go and get, that's yours to eat off of as well. But if you're not going to get it, it's mine.
Yeah.
So, and I do think that making sure that the contract, you really look over it, call Chris, right? Because there are instances where it may look like that whatever the agent gets, they get, but at the same time, there are small clauses within that say, well, actually, if you sign this agreement, I get whatever you get paid after I've signed the agreement. So, which can be very tricky. So that's good. Well, we talked about this. What's one thing you wish every athlete knew before signing anything?
I think I wish athletes would know when to slow down, even when money is involved, right?
Yeah.
And so when there's pressure to sign fast or the deal feels one sided, urgency is often a red flag and not an opportunity. Fast money can cost long term opportunity. So if someone says, hey, this expires tonight or tomorrow morning, that's usually your cue to pause. And I'm going to give an example of that. A
Okay.
few years ago, there's a football player down in Florida
Yeah.
who was approached by a company that was willing to wire him, I think it was like $400,000, right? So it's a company saying, hey, we want to sign you to an NIL deal. We're going to wire you $400,000 this week if you sign this deal, but you got to sign it tomorrow. So if he has to sign it tomorrow, the time it takes to retain an attorney, have a parent look at it, talk to a friend, like something is very, very small window.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this athlete decided to sign the agreement the following day. And this is life-changing money. $400,000 is a lot.
Yes.
And so he signed that agreement as agreed. The wire hit his account that same week. Ton of money. Again, life-changing for his family. Shortly thereafter, he ended up declaring for the NFL draft. He got drafted in the second round, had a good signing bonus, and this company said, hey, just so you recall, we signed this NIL deal. And as a part of this NIL deal, and in exchange for the $400,000 that we wired to you, you have agreed to pay us 15% of your NFL salary, pre-taxed and in perpetuity. So essentially, for as long as you play in the NFL, we're getting 15% of your salary before your taxes are even paid on it, which is egregious and insane, right? And now, of course, this athlete, as I understand it, is suing this company that they entered this deal with, probably as an unconscionable predatory deal and trying to unwind it so that they're not having to pay this commission forever and ever, so long as they're in the NFL. But that's just an example of how when there's pressure to sign fast and you have no idea what you're giving up, what you're agreeing to, it's oftentimes probably a red flag. So I think it's something that athletes need to do is, hey, just pause,
Yeah.
slow down. It doesn't need to be rushed, right? Let me see what this is about and why there's this urgency.
Yeah. I like that you speak on a little bit about the NFL as well, because we do have athletes that are out of college, they're in their professional sport. I guess my question would be, how often should they be revisiting contracts with their current agency with a lawyer? Because what I know is that there are addendums, there's amendments, there's all these things that can be done if you kind of find yourself in a spot. But I think sometimes when you are already at that level, right, there's a level of kind of contentment, right? But there's a lot going on behind the scenes, just like you said. So, you know, in your profession, what advice would you give to an athlete in their professional career
Yeah,
as
I
far as
think,
contracts?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think, as a professional,
Yeah.
you are responsible, right, for your business dealings.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you have folks who you are hiring, whether it's a CPA, financial advisor, business manager. You can have a lot of folks that you are hiring to help you handle things, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it is your responsibility, right? And so you need to look over, the business dealings you have. All right, you have an agent that you've been working with, right? it's okay to check in with the
Yeah.
agent and say, hey, we've been working for a couple of years now. I'm due for another contract. Like, let's revisit some things.
Yeah.
Right? How have things been going from your perspective? And, share, like provide feedback, right? Have a discussion, right? You are not just a professional athlete, but you are a professional,
Yeah.
right? So you are a business person that happens to play a sport. You are in charge of your empire, right? And so don't shy away from having those conversations. And especially if something happens that you don't agree with or you don't like, that's the main time where you need to raise the issue. Don't bite your tongue and just, have a conversation, lay things out on the table. Let your, agent or whoever you're working with explain things. If your financial advisor lost a shit ton of money, you
Yeah.
should be asking, why did you lose all this money? What did you invest in? Are these speculative investments? Are you investing in things that are not secure? If I told you that my strategy is protecting my assets and not doing risky stuff, did you invest in risky stuff? Let's find out what you are doing. Have those conversations. And if it comes down to, them not listening to your objectives and following your instructions, it might be time to pivot.
That's amazing. Thank you. We're coming to a close with our time. I'm so appreciative of having you today. I have one more question, but before getting into that, I just really appreciate your perspective on the questions, the topics. And I think if any athlete or even any family or anybody's listening to this, is that getting a really good lawyer and someone that you can trust is pivotal to your ongoing success, even past collegiate career, your professional career, and really just your livelihood in general. Kids, young adults are making life-changing moves and money. And so to have someone there that you can trust to help you protect that is equally as important. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. The last question is, what's a lesson you've learned that applies to life beyond sports?
I think this is something that I've learned because it resonates for me personally, as well as to, the clients and athletes that I've worked with. And that is that your name is your brand and it outlasts any deal that you will ever sign. And so sports will end one day, but your reputation will not. So protecting your reputation and your brand is critical because you might get involved in things after your career is over, right? So how you move, who you align with, how you protect yourself carries forward long after the spotlight fades and the lights in the arena go out.
Yeah, that's good. And we actually live by that here at FieldHouse Co. So I'm so glad that you touched on that. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And if anybody is listening, you need to call Chris. And if you can't get in contact with Chris, you call me and I'll get you in contact with Chris.
Yes, thank you. It is my pleasure to have this interview with you. This has been great, and I echo everything you are saying. Reach out to an attorney. They can work with you in so many different facets beyond just the initial contract. I do things with clients well beyond that, and so I'm all about longevity, and I want to see them succeed from pre-professional career to professional career and life beyond sports and all of that. So thank you once again, Sid, for having me. This is a pleasure, and hope to do it again soon.
Absolutely. When you pick Chris, you're picking family. So pick Chris. That's just my opinion. But thank you
And
so
I
much.
did not pay her to say that. She's too
He did
kind.
it. This is a free ad. Anyway, thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.